Freddie Mercury, born Farrokh Bulsara on September 5, 1946, in Zanzibar, Tanzania, rose to global fame as the lead singer and frontman of the legendary rock band Queen. His larger-than-life persona, unique voice, and electrifying stage presence made him one of the most iconic musicians in history. He was the embodiment of rock and roll rebellion, known for his flamboyance, bold fashion choices, and unapologetic individuality. But beneath the charisma and fame, Freddie Mercury was privately fighting a battle that would eventually take his life. A battle with a deadly illness that remained hidden from the public for much of his life. This is the untold story of Freddie Mercury's hidden health struggles leading up to his tragic death. Freddie's early life was filled with uncertainty and change. He was born to Parsi parents in Zanzibar, and at the age of 8, his family moved to India. He spent his formative years at a boarding school in Panchgani, where his love for music began to flourish. Despite his musical inclinations, Freddie's early life was marked by a sense of loneliness. His parents' strict traditional upbringing and the isolation he felt in school contributed to a growing sense of alienation. Music was his refuge, and it became clear to him early on that his destiny lay in the world of performance. After moving to England in 1964, Freddie pursued his dreams, eventually forming Queen in 1970. His voice, his presence, and his ability to connect with audiences led to Queen's meteoric rise to fame, making him one of the most celebrated musicians of the 70s and 80s. However, as Queen's success reached new heights, Freddie Mercury was privately struggling. While he was in the public eye, his personal health was rapidly declining. In the early 1980s, there were subtle signs that all was not well with Freddie. During this time, he began to experience unexplained weight loss, chronic fatigue, and a general sense of malaise. Yet, at the time, he attributed these symptoms to the stress of touring, the demands of his career, and the pressures of fame. Mercury's relentless work ethic, combined with his refusal to acknowledge the seriousness of his condition, led him to hide his declining health from his bandmates, friends, and the media. He continued to perform on stage, maintaining the energetic, larger-than-life persona that audiences adored, all while suffering in silence. One of the primary reasons Freddie kept his health struggles hidden was the stigma surrounding HIV and AIDS in the 80s. The AIDS epidemic had begun to spread across the world, particularly affecting the gay community, and the disease was often associated with shame and secrecy. During this time, Freddie Mercury was openly bisexual, and he had been in relationships with both men and women. His private life, however, was closely guarded, and the idea that he might be suffering from a disease that was still poorly understood and highly stigmatized was unthinkable for him. Freddie's relationship with his bandmates, particularly guitarist Brian May and drummer Roger Taylor, had always been close, but he chose not to confide in them about his health problems. Instead, he relied on his inner circle of friends to support him during this time. In 1987, Freddie Mercury began to experience more severe health problems. He had lost a significant amount of weight and was frequently fatigued, but it wasn't until he was hospitalized for a serious illness that the full extent of his condition became apparent. Despite being advised to take a break from touring and recording, Freddie refused to stop working. He was driven by his love for music and his need to continue performing, but at the same time, his body was breaking down under the stress. His weight loss was so noticeable that some people in the industry began to whisper about his declining health, but Freddie maintained his privacy, and his public appearances continued as if nothing had changed. It wasn't until the late 80s that Freddie Mercury's condition became more difficult to ignore. In 1989, Queen released their album The Miracle, and Freddie's appearances in public became more infrequent. He was also noticeably absent from promotional events, fueling speculation about his health. His once vibrant performances began to show signs of strain, and some fans started to notice that the energetic performer was no longer the same. Still, Mercury kept up the facade, refusing to speak publicly about what was happening in his personal life. During this period, he sought medical treatment for what he believed to be a series of unrelated illnesses. However, the real cause of his symptoms was still unknown to the public, and Freddie continued to press on, avoiding any discussion of what he was going through. The first indication that Freddie's condition might be more serious came in 1989 when he visited several doctors who suspected something much darker than just fatigue or a passing illness. While the exact details of his diagnosis remain private, it is believed that Freddie began to undergo tests for HIV and AIDS around this time. However, the secrecy surrounding his illness was paramount to Freddie, and he kept his diagnosis a closely guarded secret from everyone, even his closest friends. He refused to confirm or deny the rumors about his health, keeping everyone in the dark while his condition worsened. During the early 90s, Freddie Mercury's health continued to decline. He appeared increasingly frail, and his once vibrant personality began to dim. Yet, he still did everything in his power to shield his fans and the media from the truth. His private life became more and more secluded, and his only real source of support came from a small circle of friends, including his partner, Jim Hutton, and his longtime assistant, Peter Freestone. Despite the toll his condition was taking on him, Freddie refused to stop making music. Queen's final album with Freddie, Innuendo, was released in 1991, and despite his deteriorating health, Freddie continued to contribute to the album's creation. His commitment to his music remained unwavering, and he worked with his bandmates right up until the final stages of his illness. But as Freddie Mercury's symptoms worsened, it became clear that his health was failing in a way that could no longer be ignored. His weight had dropped dramatically, and he was often seen looking gaunt and frail. The once vibrant performer was now a shadow of his former self. His friends and family were deeply concerned, but Freddie still insisted on keeping the truth hidden from the public. He knew that if the world discovered the truth about his health, it would change everything. The public's perception of him, his career, and his ability to continue performing. But in reality, Freddie Mercury's health struggles were already affecting his life in ways that were impossible to ignore. The toll of his illness was catching up with him, and it would soon lead to his most difficult decision, whether or not to reveal the truth. In 1991, Freddie Mercury's battle with AIDS became undeniable. His health continued to deteriorate, and he began to withdraw from the public eye entirely. His final months were marked by private visits to doctors, treatments, and hospitalizations, though he continued to keep his illness a secret. His decision to reveal his diagnosis to the public came only a few days before his death. But the truth, once shared, would forever change the way people saw Freddie Mercury, not just as a rock star, but as a human being facing an incredible struggle. Freddie Mercury's battle with his health became an open secret as his condition worsened in the final years of his life. Despite his immense fame and success, he continued to maintain a strict level of privacy when it came to his health struggles, particularly the devastating disease he was battling. By 1991, the public was increasingly aware that something was seriously wrong, but it wasn't until just days before his death that Freddie revealed the full extent of his battle with AIDS. In this second part, we delve into the treatments he sought, the emotional toll of his illness, and his final decision to speak out. As Freddie's condition continued to deteriorate, he became more reclusive. The once vibrant and energetic performer, who had dazzled audiences with his charismatic performances, became frail and weak. He had lost a significant amount of weight, and his usual energetic presence was replaced by a quiet intensity. Despite these changes, Freddie Mercury remained adamant about keeping his diagnosis a secret. He had always been fiercely independent, and this part of his life was no different. He didn't want his fans to see him as anything other than the rock star they had grown to love. During the 1990s, when AIDS awareness was still in its early stages, the stigma surrounding the disease was overwhelming. The world was still learning about HIV, and there was a lot of fear, confusion, and prejudice surrounding it. Many of Freddie's closest friends and family knew that he had been struggling with a serious illness, but it wasn't until the final year of his life that they learned he was living with AIDS. By this point, Freddie's physical health had deteriorated to such an extent that even he could no longer ignore it. Freddie Mercury had already been experiencing chronic symptoms for years, including fatigue, weight loss, and recurrent infections. His condition had reached a point where he was forced to seek medical treatment, but he did so quietly, away from the public eye. As his illness progressed, he turned to various forms of treatment to try to manage his condition. In 1987, Freddie Mercury began to experience the early signs of what would later be recognized as HIV/AIDS. However, at this time, there was no definitive diagnosis. The symptoms were vague: fever, weight loss, and chronic fatigue, and he initially sought medical help for other issues. Throughout the late 80s, Freddie's health was increasingly compromised, but he kept his illness private, hiding his symptoms behind makeup, costumes, and stage performances. As his symptoms worsened, Freddie sought treatment from several doctors who began to suspect HIV. The disease had gained widespread attention in the 1980s, but there were still many misconceptions surrounding it. In fact, Freddie Mercury was reportedly tested for HIV in the late 80s, but the results were not confirmed until much later. Still, he did not speak publicly about the disease. Instead, he chose to focus on his music and continued to work with Queen. During this period, Freddie also sought alternative treatments in an attempt to regain his strength, including acupuncture and other holistic therapies. But his condition continued to worsen. By the early 90s, Freddie's condition had become more difficult to hide. He was hospitalized several times, and rumors began to circulate about his deteriorating health. His bandmates, friends, and family were all concerned, but Freddie remained adamant about keeping the truth under wraps. It wasn't until the final weeks of his life that Freddie's health became a topic of public discussion. Despite his declining health, Freddie continued to work on music. The band had already begun recording Innuendo, Queen's last album with Freddie, in 1990. Freddie's voice, though weakened, still conveyed the same passion and energy as it had in the past. However, his inability to perform live shows or tour became apparent. His physical state prevented him from participating in Queen's usual activities, and the once invincible rock star began to rely more on his friends and his inner circle. By the time Innuendo was released in February 1991, Freddie Mercury's health had reached a critical point. He was severely emaciated, his immune system was compromised, and he could no longer ignore the toll that AIDS had taken on his body. Yet, despite the worsening state of his health, Freddie continued to keep his condition private. He continued to work with Queen and even managed to record some of the album's most powerful tracks. But his personal life was increasingly dominated by doctor's appointments, hospital visits, and the constant struggle to maintain some semblance of normalcy. In October 1991, as his health declined rapidly, Freddie was forced to cancel a scheduled appearance at the MTV Video Music Awards. His frailty had become too apparent to ignore. It was clear to those close to him that he was no longer able to carry on as before, and his team became more protective of him as his condition worsened. It was during this time that Freddie made the decision to open up to the world about his illness. On November 23, 1991, just one day before his death, Freddie Mercury released a statement through his publicist, confirming that he had been suffering from AIDS for several years. The statement was short and to the point. Following the enormous conjecture and rumor about my health, I would like to confirm that I have been tested HIV positive and have AIDS. I have not been able to live with this illness privately for too long and have been unable to do so in the future. I hope that this will help others who are suffering from this disease, just as I have. This public admission was Freddie's way of taking control of his narrative, allowing him to address the reality of his situation before it was too late. It was also a way for him to break the silence surrounding AIDS in the music world, a disease that had claimed the lives of so many artists but had been largely ignored in mainstream media. Freddie Mercury's statement shocked the world, but it also brought attention to the ongoing HIV/AIDS epidemic, a disease that was still misunderstood and stigmatized. In the final days of his life, Freddie Mercury received constant care and support from his close friends, including his partner Jim Hutton, who had been by his side through much of his battle with AIDS. Freddie's death was a painful one, and those who were closest to him could see that he was finally at peace. Despite the pain, he remained determined to spend his final days doing what he loved, being with the people who mattered most to him and enjoying what little time he had left. Freddie's treatment in his final days consisted of palliative care and pain management. He was surrounded by those who cared for him, but his suffering was immense. AIDS had ravaged his body, and there was no cure. Freddie's passing on November 24, 1991, marked the end of an era in rock music. Queen's frontman, whose voice had touched millions, was gone, but his legacy and the awareness he raised about AIDS would live on. Freddie Mercury's death served as a wake-up call to many, shining a light on the severity of HIV/AIDS and the stigma surrounding it. While Freddie's revelation about his diagnosis came too late to save him, it did have a lasting impact on the world. His legacy lives on not just through his incredible music, but also through the Freddie Mercury Phoenix Trust, which continues to support AIDS research and raise awareness about the disease. His courage in the face of his illness helped break the silence surrounding HIV/AIDS, and his story continues to inspire millions around the world.